Years of bitter exile hardened a rejected Omega, who thought her past was buried deep within frozen woods. Suddenly, 10 massive wolves and their terrifying Alpha King surround her isolated cabin. Bloodlines lie, secrets unravel, and a cold winter night shatters everything she believed about her forgotten destiny. Rowena dragged the heavy carcass of a winter stag across the frozen threshold of her cabin, her breath pluming like dragon smoke in the frigid evening air. At 24, she was no longer the frail, timid girl who had been cast out of the Silver Creek pack. The harsh, unforgiving wilderness of Blackwood Ridge had stripped away her naivety, replacing it with sinew, sharp survival instincts, and a heart as cold as the permafrost beneath her boots. 5 years had passed since the night Cedric Ashford, the newly appointed Alpha of Silver Creek, had dragged her before the pack fire. The memory still burned in her mind, a vivid nightmare painted in shades of orange flame and dark shadows. Cedric, with his golden hair and arrogant sneer, had declared her an Omega of the lowest order, barren, weak, and cursed. He had stood before the elders and claimed that Rowena's presence was the reason the autumn harvest had blighted, and the winter sickness had taken so many pups. He formally rejected their arranged mating, snapping the fragile bond they shared, and banished her to the wild, claiming her ancestral lands of High Crag as his own compensation. Rowena had left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hunting knife her father had given her before his mysterious death. Everyone had expected her to perish within a week. Omegas did not survive alone. They were pack creatures, heavily reliant on the protection of alphas and the community of betas. Yet, Rowena did not die. She learned to trap, to hunt, and to fight. She masked her scent with pine pitch and crushed mint, hiding from the rogue wolves that prowled the deep timber. Over the years, her connection to her wolf spirit, which Cedric had mocked as dormant and pathetic, had awakened. It was not a wolf of brute strength, but one of shadow and cunning. Her fur was the color of a starless night, and she moved with a silent grace that made her the apex predator of her lonely domain. The cabin she called home was a testament to her sheer will. Built from fallen timber and sealed with mud and moss, it sat at the very edge of the kingdom's borders, far from the prying eyes of the royal packs. Inside, the hearth crackled with life, casting a warm, flickering glow over the pelt-covered walls. She began to dress the stag, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The smell of fresh blood and raw meat was a comfort, a sign that she would survive another brutal month. Suddenly, the ambient noises of the forest, the wind whistling through the barren branches, the distant hoot of a snow owl, ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the woods. Rowena froze, her blood-stained hands hovering over the stag. Her senses, honed by years of solitary survival, flared with warning. The ground beneath her boots vibrated faintly, a rhythmic, synchronized thumping that spoke of multiple large bodies moving through the deep snow. She quickly wiped her hands on a rag, grabbed her heavy ironwood bow, and slipped silently to the shuttered window. Peering through a narrow crack, her breath caught in her throat. Emerging from the dense tree line were wolves. Not ordinary wolves, and certainly not the ragged rogues she occasionally chased off her territory. These were monsters, 10 massive beasts, each the size of a draft horse, with thick, coarse fur ranging from slate grey to obsidian black. They moved with terrifying military precision, fanning out in a wide semicircle to surround her small cabin. Their golden eyes glowed in the twilight, fixed intently on her front door. Rowena's heart hammered against her ribs. A royal execution squad, she thought, panic rising in her chest. Had Cedric finally discovered she was still alive? Had he sent his elites to finish the job he was too cowardly to do 5 years ago? But then, the trees parted once more, and the breath was truly stolen from her lungs. A figure stepped into the clearing, flanked by 2 wolves so large they could have easily snapped a grizzly bear's neck. It was a man, towering and impossibly broad, draped in a thick cloak of white dire wolf fur. Even in the dimming light, Rowena recognized the crest stamped into the heavy steel pauldron on his shoulder, a roaring wolf crowned with thorns. It was Alistair Sterling, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Alistair was a legend, a warlord who had united the warring packs through sheer dominance and ruthless strategy. He was said to be a giant among men, possessing a wolf form so terrifying that entire armies had surrendered at the mere sight of it. He was a myth to someone like Rowena, a distant ruler whose laws governed the lands she had been exiled from. What was the Alpha King doing at a banished Omega's doorstep with his personal royal guard? Rowena's mind raced. She could not fight 10 royal guards and the king himself. Fleeing into the night would be futile. They would track her down in minutes. Steeling her nerves, she decided she would not die cowering in the dark. She was the daughter of High Crag, even if they had stolen her title. She slung her bow over her shoulder, slipped a pair of silver-inlaid daggers into her boots, and unbarred the heavy wooden door. The hinges groaned loudly in the silent clearing as she stepped out onto the frozen porch. The biting wind whipped Rowena's dark hair across her face as she stood her ground. 10 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto her, the sheer weight of their collective alpha auras pressing down on her like a physical force. Most Omegas would have instantly dropped to their knees, baring their necks in total submission. Rowena simply tightened her grip on her bow, keeping her chin raised. Alistair Sterling stopped 10 paces from the porch. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, his face chiseled from granite, and marred by a jagged scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue that seemed to look right through her soul. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the massive wolves and the crunch of snow under the king's boots as he shifted his weight. "You are a difficult woman to find, Rowena of High Crag." Alistair's voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated in her chest. Rowena flinched inwardly at the use of her true title, but kept her expression stoic. "Rowena is enough," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "High Crag was taken from me by Cedric Ashford, with the blessing of the crown. I am merely a nameless exile now. Why is the Alpha King trespassing on my solitude?" A low growl rippled through the pack of guards at her insolence. A massive grey wolf stepped forward, snapping its jaws in warning. Alistair simply raised a single, gloved hand. The growling ceased instantly. The absolute obedience he commanded was chilling. "The crown blessed no such thing," Alistair stated coldly, his piercing eyes scanning her, taking in her practical leather armor, the blood on her hands, and the defiance in her posture. "Cedric Ashford presented the High Council with documents proving your death by winter fever 5 years ago. He claimed the lands of High Crag as his right by morning mate." Rowena let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Morning mate? The man publicly rejected me, branded me a cursed Omega, and threw me to the wilderness to freeze. He forged my death to steal my family's iron mines and fertile valleys." "I am aware of his forgery," Alistair said, taking a slow step closer. The sheer heat radiating from his massive frame pushed back the chill of the evening. 3 weeks ago, Cedric Ashford arrived at the capital. He sought to solidify his hold on the Silver Creek territory by offering a massive tribute of Winterbloom. a rare medicinal herb that cures the blood blight currently ravaging my southern borders. Rowena's eyes narrowed. Winterbloom only grew in the high altitudes of Blackwood Ridge. She was the one who cultivated it, leaving bundles of it near the trading post at the edge of the woods in exchange for salt and iron arrowheads. The merchant, a greedy baiter named Griffith, must have sold it directly to Cedric, who then claimed it as his own harvest. He claimed his pack's new healers grew it, Alistair continued, watching her reaction closely. But the royal apothecaries noticed something strange. The bundles were bound with a specific twine, dyed with crushed mountain berries, a technique exclusive to the fallen house of High Crag. Furthermore, my lead tracker found a single strand of dark hair caught in the bindings. Alistair reached into his heavy fur cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. The scent on that hair was unmistakable. It possessed the rich, deep earthiness of the High Crag bloodline, a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. Rowena swallowed hard. She had been so careful, yet a single strand of hair and a knot of twine had brought the King of the North to her doorstep. "So you have come to execute me for exposing his lie?" Rowena asked, her hand inching toward the hilt of the dagger in her boot. "Or perhaps to force me to harvest herbs for your dying southern packs?" Alistair's expression darkened, an imposing storm gathering in his icy eyes. "Do not insult me, little wolf. I do not execute victims of treason, nor do I enslave them. Cedric Ashford has committed high treason by lying to the crown, usurping a noble house, and hoarding a vital medical resource while my people die." He closed the remaining distance between them, stepping onto the wooden porch. He was so large that he completely blocked out the moon, casting Rowena in his shadow. Instinct screamed at her to back away, to submit, but she planted her feet firmly. "Then what do you want from me?" she demanded, staring up into his scarred face. "I want the true Alpha of High Crag," Alistair said softly, a stark contrast to his imposing figure. "Cedric's deceit has destabilized the region. He is currently under house arrest in the capital, believing he is awaiting a royal commendation. I came here with my personal guard to verify the truth with my own eyes, to see if the fragile, broken Omega from his reports was truly alive." He looked her up and down, a flicker of something dangerously close to respect passing through his eyes. "You are neither fragile nor broken, and you are no Omega." Rowena's breath hitched. "I was tested at 16. I failed to produce an alpha aura. Trauma and fear suppress a true wolf," Alistair countered, stepping back into the snow. "Your father was murdered. Your arranged mate tormented you. Your pack betrayed you. You shut your power away to survive. But out here, in the wild, you have grown into what you were always meant to be." He turned to his 10 massive guards. "Beatrice!" he barked. The large grey wolf that had growled earlier stepped forward, shifting seamlessly into a tall, battle-scarred woman, wrapped in leathers. She knelt before the king, presenting a heavy, velvet-wrapped bundle. Alistair took the bundle and turned back to Rowena. He threw the velvet back, revealing an ancient, gleaming broadsword. The pommel was forged in the shape of a wolf, howling at a ruby moon. Rowena gasped, stumbling back a step. It was the ancestral blade of High Crag, her father's sword, the very sword Cedric had paraded around with after taking over her lands. "I stripped this from his armory before I rode out," Alistair declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority, echoing off the frozen trees. "Rowena of High Crag, I have not come to kill you or tax you. I have come to escort you to the capital. You will stand before the High Council. You will expose Cedric Ashford's treachery, and you will reclaim your birthright. But to do that, You must leave this forest and ride with me." He held the massive sword out to her, handle first. "Will you remain an exiled ghost in the snow, or will you take your sword and claim the vengeance owed to you?" Rowena stared at the weapon. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the violent surge of long-buried rage clawing its way up her throat. 5 years of solitude, of freezing nights and desperate hunger crashed over her. Cedric had stolen her life. She looked up past the sword, meeting the Alpha King's intense, icy gaze. There was a dangerous promise in his eyes. This was no simple rescue mission. It was a political maneuver. The king needed her alive to legally execute Cedric and stabilize the region. She would be a pawn in his royal court. But as she reached out and wrapped her calloused fingers around the cold, leather-bound hilt of her father's sword, she realized she didn't care. Let the king think he could control her. "I will ride with you, Alistair Sterling," Rowena said, her voice dropping an octave as a low, rumbling growl, an undeniable alpha sound, vibrated in her chest. "But when Cedric Ashford dies, it will not be by the executioner's block. It will be by my hand." Alistair's lips curved into a fierce, approving smile. "I would expect nothing less from my future queen." Rowena's head snapped up in shock, the sword suddenly feeling 10 times heavier. "Your what?" Before she could process his words, Alistair turned away, his massive white cloak billowing in the wind. "Mount up!" he roared to his guards. "We ride for the capital." The twist of his words hung in the freezing air, heavier than the impending winter storm, as the exiled Omega realized her survival was only just beginning. The journey to Frostspire, the capital of the Northern Territories, was a brutal trek through howling blizzards and treacherous mountain passes. Yet, for Rowena, it felt less grueling than a single day of her former exile. She rode a massive, sable-coloured gelding provided by the King's Guard, riding flank to flank with Alistair Sterling. His words, "my future queen," had echoed in her mind with every hoofbeat, a maddening puzzle she refused to address until they made camp on the 3rd night. They sat across from each other, across a roaring fire, the 10 elite guards forming a perimeter in the dark woods. The flames danced across Alistair's scarred face, softening his hardened features. "You spoke of me as your queen." Rowena finally broke the silence, her voice cutting through the crackle of burning pine. "I am a banished outcast with a stolen title. You are the Alpha King. What political game are you playing, Alistair?" Alistair looked up from the whetstone he was running along his broadsword. His ice-blue eyes met hers without a hint of deception. "The High Council is a nest of vipers, Rowena. They approved Cedric's claim to your lands 5 years ago because they were bribed. They favor weak-willed leaders they can control. If I simply march you into the capital and declare you the rightful heir of High Krog, they will tie us up in bureaucratic tribunals for years. They will demand proof, witnesses, and endless trials." He paused, leaning forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the snow. "But if you enter Frostspire as my chosen mate, the future Queen of the North, they cannot question you. Royal decree supersedes council law. Your lands are returned instantly, and your word becomes absolute truth." "A marriage of convenience, then," Rowena stated, though a strange, unexpected flutter of disappointment curled in her chest. "A marriage of necessity," Alistair corrected, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. "But do not mistake my intentions. I have refused every pampered, aristocratic alpha female the Council has thrown at me. I need a partner who understands survival, someone who doesn't flinch at the sight of blood or the harsh reality of winter. When I saw the traps you built, the way you stood your ground against 10 royal guards without trembling. I knew I had found my equal. Rowena swallowed hard, staring into the flames. Nobody had ever called her an equal. Cedric had called her a burden. Her father had called her fragile. Alistair saw a warrior. "There is more," Alistair continued, pulling a thick, leather-bound folder from his saddlebags. He tossed it across the fire. It landed at Rowena's boots. "Cedric Ashford is not just a usurper. He is a domestic terrorist." Rowena picked up the folder. Stamped on the front in faded gold ink was a real, undeniably human insignia. Pinkerton National Detective Agency, Private Investigations Division. Pinkerton? Rowena frowned, flipping it open to see grainy photographs, chemical analysis charts, and financial ledgers. These are human investigators. Why would the Alpha King use human mercenaries? Because wolf politics are stained with bias and scent blindness, Alistair growled, disgust lacing his tone. I needed absolute, incorruptible proof from a third party. The Pinkerton agents care only for gold and facts. They discovered that the blood blight ravaging our southern packs is not a natural sickness. Rowena's eyes widened as she read the heavily redacted documents. Heavy metal soil poisoning, imported agricultural defoliants. She looked up, horrified. Cedric is poisoning the Southern Territories. Yes, Alistair nodded grimly. He employed human smugglers to dump toxic chemicals into the southern reservoirs. The symptoms mimic the ancient blood blight. Then he miraculously steps forward with the winter bloom harvest from your stolen lands, offering the only cure at exorbitant extortion rates. He is bleeding the southern packs of their wealth and starving them of their strength, all while posing as their savior. A cold, lethal fury settled into Rowena's bones. This was no longer just about her stolen life or a broken mating bond. Cedric was slaughtering innocent pups and elders for political leverage and coin. He had weaponized her ancestral lands to commit mass murder. She closed the Pinkerton dossier, her grip so tight the thick leather groaned. The suppressed wolf spirit within her, dormant for so long, clawed violently at the cage of her ribs. "He will pay," Rowena whispered, her eyes flashing from their natural hazel to a brilliant, terrifying gold. Alistair watched her transformation, a primal hunger flashing in his own gaze. "Tomorrow we arrive at Frostspire. The Council believes I am returning to pin a medal on Cedric's chest. Instead, we are going to burn his world to ash." The Grand Hall of Frostspire was a cavernous monument to ancient power, built entirely from polished black marble and vaulted stained glass that depicted the brutal history of the northern packs. Hundreds of aristocratic wolves filled the tiered viewing galleries, murmuring in hushed, eager tones. At the center of the hall, standing before the raised royal dais, was Cedric Ashford. Clad in a tailored crimson coat trimmed with silver fox fur, his golden hair caught the light of 1,000 floating candles. He looked every inch the wealthy, benevolent savior he pretended to be, flanked by 3 corrupt council elders who beamed with manufactured pride. Then, the heavy iron-wrought doors of the grand hall shuddered. With a deafening crash that echoed like thunder, the doors blew inward, slamming against the stone walls. The entire assembly fell dead silent. Alistair Sterling strode into the hall, his massive dire wolf cloak billowed behind him, and he radiated an alpha aura so violently oppressive that several wolves in the front rows physically dropped to their knees, choking on the sheer dominance of their king. But it was not the king who drew the horrified gasps of the aristocratic crowd. Walking one step behind his right shoulder was a woman clad in dark, scarred leather armor, her dark hair braided tight against her scalp. Strapped to her back was the legendary wolf pommel broadsword of Highcrag. Cedric's smug smile instantly dissolved. The colour drained from his pristine face, leaving him ashen. He stumbled backward, knocking into a council elder. "No," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper against the silence. "It's a trick. She's dead." Alistair ascended the dais, but he did not sit on his throne. "Lords and ladies of the North," Alistair's voice boomed, rattling the stained glass. "You have gathered here today to witness the commendation of Cedric Ashford. Instead, you will bear witness to his execution." Pandemonium erupted. The council elders shouted in frantic protest. "Silence!" Alistair roared. He tossed the heavy, leather-bound Pinkerton dossier onto the polished marble floor. It slid and stopped perfectly at the feet of the lead elder. Contained within are the verified, independent findings of the Pinkerton Agency, bank ledgers, smuggling manifests, and chemical analysis. Cedric Ashford poisoned the southern reservoirs with agricultural toxins. He engineered the blight to extort the dying packs. The crowd gasped, horrified whispers rippling through the galleries like a sudden wildfire. Furthermore, Alistair continued, turning his icy blue gaze toward the trembling Cedric. He committed high treason by forging the death of a noble heir to usurp her lands. I present to you the rightful Alpha of High Crag and my chosen queen, Rowena. Cedric's shock abruptly morphed into cornered, desperate rage. "Lies!" he screamed, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "That is a feral rogue dug up from the dirt to frame me. Rowena was a pathetic, barren Omega. She died in the snow. The king is trying to steal my medicinal monopoly using a wild vagrant." Rowena stepped forward, descending the dais until she stood merely 10 feet from the man who had destroyed her life. She did not yell. She did not scream. She simply shattered the restraints on her soul. The alpha aura she released was not like Alistair's heavy, crushing gravity. It was sharp, freezing, and entirely suffocating, like the sudden, lethal drop in temperature before a winter avalanche. Frost literally crept up the black marble pillars. Cedric choked, falling to one knee as Rowena's absolute dominance slammed into his chest. "I am Rowena of High Crag," she stated, her voice echoing with a supernatural, dual resonance. "And you are a thief, a liar, and a murderer." Realizing his political allies were abandoning him, Cedric bared his teeth. "You want my life? You want your title?" He spat, his eyes glowing a frantic yellow. "I invoke the right of iron and blood, trial by combat. If you are truly an alpha, prove it without the king's guards." It was a desperate gamble. He believed she was still the terrified teenager he had abused. Alistair tensed, his hand dropping to the hilt of his blade, but Rowena held up a single hand, stopping him. She looked back at the king with a fierce, feral smile. "He is mine." Alistair nodded slowly, stepping back. "The right is accepted. Seal the doors." The crowd scrambled backward, forming a wide, terrified circle. Cedric didn't waste a second. He tore off his crimson coat and shifted. Bones cracked and muscles bulged as he transformed into a massive, golden-furred timber wolf. He snarled, saliva dripping from his massive jaws, his claws scratching deep gouges into the marble floor. Rowena closed her eyes. She thought of the 5 years of freezing nights, the hunger, the absolute will it took to survive. She opened her eyes, and they burned like twin suns. Instead of a traditional, agonizing shift, the shadows in the room violently converged upon her. In a blur of fluid motion, where the woman had stood, a nightmare now crouched. Rowena's wolf was slightly smaller than Cedric's, but she was a creature of pure, terrifying twilight. Her fur was impossibly black, absorbing the light. Cedric lunged, a roaring mass of golden muscle aiming directly for her throat. Rowena didn't meet his charge. She slipped beneath his jaws with liquid grace, her razor-sharp claws raking a deep, bloody canyon down his exposed rib cage. Cedric howled in agony, his momentum carrying him forward into a stone pillar. He recovered wildly, snapping and tearing at the air, but Rowena fought like the ruthless wild. She was a predator of the Blackwood Ridge. She used the environment, bouncing off the stone walls, darting in and out of his peripheral vision. Every time he struck, he met empty air. Every time she struck, she left a crippling wound. Panic set into Cedric's golden eyes. Bleeding heavily and gasping for breath, he made one final desperate leap to pin her with his sheer weight. Rowena met him mid-air, her jaws clamped down with bone-crushing force on his front foreleg. The sickening snap echoed through the silent hall. They crashed to the marble. Before Cedric could even whimper, Rowena was on his chest, pinning him down, her jaws locked firmly around his throat. One twitch, and she would sever his windpipe. The entire hall held its collective breath. Slowly, deliberately, she released his throat. She stepped off his bleeding form and shifted back into her human skin, covered in his blood. "Death is too easy for you," Rowena commanded, her voice cold. "You will be stripped of your wolf. You will be handed over to the Pinkerton authorities for domestic terrorism. You will rot in a human, concrete cell, unable to ever see the forest again." Alistair walked forward, undeniable pride in his eyes. He signaled the royal guards, who dragged the broken Cedric away. The king turned to the awestruck crowd. "The rite is concluded. High Crag is restored." Slowly, the wolves of the northern court fell to their knees, baring their necks in total submission. Alistair stopped before Rowena, gently wiping a streak of blood from her cheek. "I told you," he murmured. "I found my equal." Rowena leaned into his touch, her frozen heart finally melting. In the ashes of her revenge, she had gained a kingdom, and a mate who truly saw her. If you were captivated by Rowena's journey from a rejected, exiled survivor to a fierce, unstoppable queen, hit that like button. Share this incredible story of betrayal, revenge, and destined romance with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another epic, heart-pounding werewolf tale. Leave a comment below. Would you have spared Cedric? See you next time.